It's the Leading on Purpose podcast, helping leaders, teams, and organizations lead more intentionally, effectively, and with purpose. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to be joined yet again by my co-host, Doug Waltman. Doug, thanks for doing another episode with me. It's great to have you.
Oh, John, my pleasure. It's good to see you.
Yeah. So if you didn't get a chance to tune in last time for season 2, episode 5, Doug and I had a 2-part conversation around the coaching leadership style. And so today we plan to walk you through a framework you can use to have a coaching conversation with a member of your team, peer, colleague, really anyone. And in fact, Doug, this is a framework that I think you and I both have used as well for consulting work. When we're doing executive coaching, when we're in the coaching process with another individual. So really excited to bring that to you today. If you're still kind of wrapping your head around what is this coaching leadership style? When should I use it? What are some of the things I need to think about? I would pause right now and go back and listen to season 2, episode 5, that prior conversation. So, Doug, where do we start with this when we talk about a framework for coaching? I guess maybe first and foremost, why have one?
Well, that's an important question. And I love the fact that you use the term framework. And so as you're listening to this, what I think is important for you to understand is you may be on a wide range of experience coaching individuals. So, for example, if you have a framework that you already use for coaching conversations, John and I are certainly not going to suggest abandon that and take on what we're doing here, that you simply take in today's conversation and maybe hold it up against what you're doing today and say, how can I enhance what it is I'm doing today? And on the other end, if you're thinking, you know what, this whole coaching conversation, coaching leadership style is new to me, then maybe this is your starting point and you just take it in, and over time you make it your own. And I know, John, you and I have been doing this work for quite some time in our respective consulting practices and coaching work that you just mentioned, even in some of the facilitation that we've done together. And I think for both you and I, this has morphed and changed over time. So the word framework to me isn't meant to be restrictive. It's just meant to be a guidance. And so as you take this in today, just keep an open mind would be my encouragement to you. And just think about, how would this work for me? You may hear language and ideas today. It's like, I get it. That's not exactly how I would do it or how I would say it, because authenticity and how you coach someone is really important. So yeah, I think that's going to be the fun part of this conversation today is just exploring it. You and I sharing our perspectives on what a coaching conversation sounds like. But again, for our listeners out there, just make this your own.
Totally agree. I know for me, what's always been helpful as I'm learning new things personally or professionally is to have some guidance, have a framework, have kind of an instruction manual to start with. And I think kind of to your point, Doug, inevitably, first time out, it's going to maybe feel a little mechanical, little
Right.
robotic. But over time, as you kind of subscribe yourself to, again, could be our process, could be another process, the point being a process for a coaching conversation, the more you practice it, the more you'll be able to make it natural for yourself, make it seem and feel authentic, not only to you, but to the person you're coaching. But I guess my perspective has been you got to start somewhere. And again, I think about some of the other skills I've learned in other areas and how important it was for me to really subscribe myself to the rigor and the structure of it, and then kind of wrap my personality and authenticity into that after I've developed a little bit of mastery around the
Yeah.
framework itself. And so I know for me, that's been my process, but something we hope is helpful for you today. One thing that I want to mention, Doug, is, you kind of think about why a framework. This was a research study I think you cited years ago. We were co-facilitating, and you mentioned, I'm not sure if it was a Zenger Folkman study or who had done the study, But basically, it had mentioned there's two things that are really common denominators when one is successful leveraging the coaching leadership style. One, they have a relationship with the individual that they're coaching. And number two, they have a framework, some framework that they're using to keep themselves centered and guided through the conversation. So any additional thoughts on that study? I don't know why I remember that, but I think it was one of the first times that you and I really had a conversation around how do we facilitate and teach others how to use this coaching leadership style.
Well, first of all, let me compliment you on your memory because it has been quite some time since we discussed that. And Zinger Folkman is the organization that did the research on this many years ago, and I found that to be absolutely true. Those two components, and there's actually a third component in addition to having the framework, and then also a relationship built on trust is the person being coached. And again, whether it's a team member that you're coaching or just any human being that you're having a coaching conversation with, do they have a sense of hope around addressing the issue?
Mm,
Because if someone doesn't even have that, there's going to be very low energy, very low commitment to making it happen. But certainly having a framework that you're comfortable with, that you can lean into, the quality of your coaching goes up exponentially because now you're not so much thinking about what's the next question I ask or what's the next step. It just becomes a part of how you relate to people. And there's an expression that I love in coaching conversations that you just dance in the moment. And to me, when I first started using this coaching leadership style, especially with people I was leading, that was a little bit intimidating because you just never know what's going to come up in the conversation. But once you get really comfortable with this framework and the process, your confidence and your ability to respond to whatever's going to come up in that coaching conversation increases dramatically.
yeah. Wait, and one thing I want to clear up for people too is it may start to sound like Doug and I are talking out of both sides of our mouths. Like, wait a minute, you want me to follow a framework, but you want me to dance in the moment. Which is it? It really is both. And so if you can subscribe yourself to this, a framework again, you're just going to have a kind of a better North Star, a sense of where this conversation is at, what would be most helpful to the individual that I'm coaching, and just in the back of your mind, kind of knowing where are we in this conversation.
Yep.
And in so doing, still very much so, as Doug said, dancing in the moment, taking whatever is there and being fully present.
Yep.
So we mentioned a lot in our last two-part conversation around mindsets, the way we frame this conversation, the way we think about our role as a leader. A lot of that you need to pull forward into this conversation. Any other final thoughts, Doug, that you have before we actually get in the framework on things people ought to think about coming in? Because I know one of the big ones for me that comes to mind is the quality of listening is a really big deal here. And so the idea of dancing in the moment, being fully present, is really listening almost at a vulnerable level where you have no idea what's going to happen, where this is going to go. Additional thoughts either on that or other things folks should have in mind before they lean into this framework?
The one thing that came to my mind when you tossed that question out there, John, is your own mindset of not putting pressure on yourself to make it perfect and get it right. Because here's what I can tell you wholeheartedly, whether it's my experience in coaching people or the wonderful coaching I personally have benefited from over the years. When you have these conversations with someone where you are listening to them, like you just mentioned, you're totally present. It's about them. It's about their agenda, whatever their need that's being expressed. Uh, it almost saddens me to say this out loud, but those moments in life when you have that kind of conversation with another human being can be few and far between. And so don't put the pressure on yourself is, oh, what's that next powerful, great question I'm going to ask? Or is this conversation going perfectly? People, when they feel listened to and seen and heard, are not expecting perfection from you as a coach. What they appreciate is you're showing up for me in this very supportive way. These can be some really powerful moments in relationships and can provide great breakthrough opportunities for folks. So if you can, I think I mentioned in our prior conversation, one of my tendencies is to be a perfectionist. And when I was first really learning to use that, that's one of the things I had to work hard. I had to eliminate those demons from my mind and just understand this person isn't sitting there waiting for me to get that perfect next question to them. They're just appreciating somebody walking on this journey with them. So just take that pressure off, especially if this is really new to you. And I think you'll be really amazed with that mindset, how much progress you're going to make in a relatively short period of time in your ability to have these kind of conversations with people.
Yeah. Simon Sinek did a piece not too long ago that was really interesting to me. And he said, if you could do nothing else for people, and this is actually supposedly a policy he has within his organization, the team that he leads, where you're allowed to call him or anyone else on the team and just say, I need 8 minutes. And what that means is a cue up for, I just need you to be fully present for me. That's all I don't need answers. I don't need feedback. I don't need anything but for you to be fully present. And in his mind, if you could do nothing else for people personally and professionally, the power of just being fully present. Don't deny the impact that you could have by just fully listening to someone. And so in so doing, I think you got to kind of let go of some of the temptations you have in a coaching conversation to jump to the solution. This act of letting go that I know I've experienced as a leader, where am I doing my job as a leader if I don't provide you a quality solution? If I don't provide you a great idea on how to move forward on your thing, yeah, I am adding value simply by being fully present. And so it's a big aspect and a big way to frame it in your mind as you step into these conversations. So where do we start with this framework? What's
I don't know. How
the best way to lean in?
Well, John, I was going to say, let's start at the beginning. So that's a big duh.
Amazing.
But
so this isn't going to be like a Tarantino movie. We're not going to jump around.
But I think once we go through the framework, what will then become evident is this framework feeds upon itself. Yeah. It's a loop.
Yep.
So where you in the coaching conversation, as we'll see later on, is exactly where you can start the next coaching conversation. Yeah. So we're going to start at the quote unquote beginning, but it'll become more evident as you listen that this can just be a cycle that you continue to go through with another person. But
excellent.
But yeah, why don't we just what's this darn coaching conversation even sound like to start with? What would you say about that? What's it look like? What's it sound like? What is that beginning point?
Yeah, I think for me, it's that awareness in the moment. Someone knocks on that office door, and I can, if I close my eyes and think back to my years as a leader, I can remember that knock. And when that door opens and that member of the team walks through, and their sentence starts with, "I'm stuck," or "I need help," it's that moment as the leader, you get to choose, how am I going to respond to this? And so if we choose coaching and we're paying attention to this as an opportunity or moment to kind of facilitate discovery for you as the member of my team, then we can get into this coaching conversation. So first thing we've got to wrap our heads around is what's described as really the current state. Where are we and what is it that we're talking about?
Yep.
And so some really important things here. I think the number one thing really, how can I help you gain clarity around the situation that we're talking about? And so, well, what does that mean? One, sometimes when someone comes in, the issue is huge and it could be this big. And if you're listening to this on audio, my hands are way far apart right now. It's this huge thing. And so in this current state part of the conversation, this first piece of the framework, the goal is to help them narrow that in. What is actually the problem, maybe behind the problem? Another version of events that I've seen play out is sometimes we start over here on topic A, then we end up way over in a different direction on topic B. But we won't know that until we spend some time in the current state. So I know for me, Doug, for example, when I've used this to provide executive coaching, certainly as a leader, if it's a 45-minute, hour-long conversation, we may spend up to or more than half the conversation just in this first part of the framework, really facilitating discovery and clarity around what is it that we're talking about, where are you at as it relates to this issue. And so probably the biggest word I would use, what are we trying to do here besides facilitate discovery, is shape perspective, round it out. And so the way you might kind of visualize this as you're thinking about members of your team who have come to you with that knock on the door and said, hey, I'm stuck, help me. You might picture in your mind, how close is their face to that problem by the time they're asking for help? Usually they're knee deep in it, face to face with the issue. And so one of the most helpful things I've found that you're trying to do under the current state is help them zoom out and round out their view of the situation they've described.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, John, as you're describing that, I'm visualizing again somebody that's never really had a lot of experience with these kind of conversations. You mentioned, maybe this 45 minutes, a good portion right there, that may trigger some. What do you mean 45 minutes? Have you seen my calendar? Do you know what my schedule is? And you can't rush this process.
Yeah.
And I think as you're talking about their perspective of the issue, where are they with it? It is just that is a really key moment in the conversation, because if there's not clarity around what is the real issue,
Yeah.
I love the way you describe the problem behind the problem. We're probably not going to have as an effective coaching conversation and outcome as we need to. So if you kind of notice something viscerally when you talked about 45 minutes for a conversation, yeah, sometimes these take a bit of time. This is about effectiveness. It's not about being expedient. And sometimes as we go through this framework, the current state may be the one and only thing you talk about in this one moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't get through the entire framework. I've had coaching conversations where there are some big breakthroughs in the current state conversation because somebody does have that shift in perspective. They've been thinking about an issue a certain way. And as soon as you get them to look at it from a different perspective, it opens up all kinds of possibilities or ways to consider their challenge or their issue that they really hadn't thought of before. So this is a messy part of the coaching conversation. And you're asking this person to articulate a perspective that maybe they've not said it out loud, or they're still struggling to really understand what's going on. And that's where just being present for them, listening to them is really, really critical in this first step.
Yeah. And as an aside, we mentioned before we started on the framework, just the quality of listening is really important here. And Doug, it's such an important call out that I have to have the time set aside to invest in this. And so one of the things we mentioned in our last 2-part conversation, the last episode, was not every conversation can be a coaching conversation. I think the watch out for here is don't pretend to coach. Don't pretend to listen. If you really don't have the time right now, I don't think there's anything wrong with setting a time. And so that knock happens at the door. They step through and you're up against the wall yourself. You've got something due in the next hour. We're not saying drop everything all day long. You've got tasks and responsibilities as well. And we're no stranger to those things. It's knowing that the wrong choice here would be to pretend to listen to you or listen long enough until, I think I can give you an answer and get you on your way because I'm trying to be efficient. This is not an efficient conversation. This is an effective conversation, and it takes time. And so fear not if the best call in the moment when the knock comes on the door is to say, hey, what's your schedule like this afternoon? I really want to spend some time on whatever it is you need to share. I want to get into that. The other thing I'll say, just as maybe a last piece here on the quality of listening, if you kind of picture listening as levels of quality, at the lowest level, quality level of listening, which would really be kind of ignoring someone or pretending, kind of really going through the motions of listening, I would almost align that with what the pace setting leadership style looks like in practice in a conversation. It's not really a conversation at all because I'm not even fully present. I'm somewhere else. I'm so focused on the other things I need to do, the tasks and responsibilities, that I'm sitting across from you, but I'm not really there. The
Mhm.
directive style, it to me is more of a selective listening. I may listen for a moment, for a minute, until I've heard something that you've mentioned that's either interesting to me or something that I feel I can solve for. And so I'll listen just long enough, but we never did find out the problem behind the problem. So just a way as you're listening to this and thinking about this framework to challenge yourself on what's the level of listening that I'm actually bringing to the conversation. Because at those lower levels, that's where pace setting and directive leaders kind of live in terms of the quality of their listening. It's the coaching leader that goes to that highest level and is fully present, leaves behind really everything in terms of their needs and their agenda.
It's, this, I think one of the more challenging things for me in taking on the coaching leadership style at this stage in the conversation is I'm also a very naturally curious person. And so there can be a temptation to one, stop listening to the person and start asking questions to get a lot of detailed information just to kind of satisfy my curiosity.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I've often been asked by individuals that know that, uh, I professionally coach folks. They'll say, well, the folks that you coach, uh, wouldn't you have to know their industry or their role or their company? And then I think about as a leader coaching team members. Now I know them as a human being. I know the business inside and out. They may be performing a job that at one point in my career that I did. And so this isn't about you feeding your need and your desire to have a lot of the details in the information and asking them a lot of questions about, well, tell me what happened next, or have you tried this idea, or those types of questions. That's more about me as a coach and not about you as the person being coached.
Yeah.
So I'll tell folks, I actually find coaching conversations where I'm coaching someone that I don't know their job, I don't know their industry, because it's I don't have to fight the temptation to give advice or in my mind related to, oh, this is a situation I've been in before. So this current state is not about satisfying your itch to know more. It's about you providing open ended questions that lead that person to maybe think differently or talk differently
Yeah.
about their issue. So, one of the things, John, I'm always listening for at this stage in a coaching conversation with someone is not the details of what they're saying, but what I'm trying to notice is what is the relationship to the issue
Exactly.
that's being discussed. And by relationship, it can mean how do they view their level of involvement in this particular issue. So if I'm coaching a team member of mine and they're just real frustrated with one of their other colleagues on the team and they just want to come in and just complain and just kind of pile on this person, that to me is language that indicates their perspective of this problem is it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with the other person.
Yeah.
And so when you start to hear that, you start asking questions around their relationship with the person. Tell me about how you've been responding to this person when X happens.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of curiosity and those kind of questions that you're looking for, not to get a lot of detailed information around, well, tell me about the last 5 conversations you had with your colleague. What did they say? What did you do? Why were you frustrated? It's really getting them to maybe rethink what is my current role
Yeah.
in creating this because that's where their control is. I can't, as a coach, there's nothing we can do in the coaching conversation that's going to change that other person's behavior. If
Yeah,
there's
they're
going to
not
be
here.
change, right, it's going to come from you and the way you're relating to that person, not relating to that person, what you're expecting. So that's the general nature of this part of the conversation. It's about getting them to more clearly understand really what is the issue and really importantly, what's my role in creating this particular issue.
Yep. And so it's tough to resist that at this stage, that, kind of scratching your own itch, your own curiosity. Because I found kind of two things will drive that. One, you're just curious, particularly if you're this person's leader and you are kind of curious. Well, what happened in the meeting? Well, then what did they say? Ooh, and it starts to get almost a little juicy and interesting, if you will, for you. So that's one version of maybe how we end up asking questions that at the end of the day really aren't helpful to the person you're coaching. They're just to satisfy your own curiosity. Now, here's the red flag people will often throw up as I'm working them through this framework. They're like, well, John, don't I need that context around the situation to be helpful to this person? And I guess the way I handle that or respond to that is to describe to the person the difference between getting a person unstuck versus getting a problem unstuck.
Mm.
And so in this current state, as you said, Doug, it's what's the person that you're coaching experiencing? What's their relationship to the problem? Because at this point, it's really less about the problem itself and more around how can I facilitate discovery for the person as opposed to, hey, by the end of this, we're going to solve your problem. That's not my role. It's discovery for you. And so appreciate that subtle nuance. Let go of your supposed need for context around the problem and appreciate that nuance. I'm here to help the person get unstuck, not necessarily the problem. And those can be sometimes one and the same, but very often different, two different paths in the conversation.
Well, John, in our prior conversation, one of the concepts that we talked about is a lot of times a coaching conversation, and I think this is especially true in the initial part of the conversation, is the holding up of the mirror to the person.
Absolutely.
So what we're suggesting here is listening is really important, but you're not just sitting there saying nothing for the entire conversation. You're listening, and this is where it just comes with practice and the feel of it. It's after the person's been talking for a while, what's the appropriate time to bring your voice as their leader, as a coach, into the conversation and hold up that mirror and reflect back to them what you're hearing. And that reflection, to me, can go down two paths, and sometimes they're intertwined with each other. Sometimes you're reflecting back how you've heard them describe the particular problem or issue. So if it's a coworker, what I'm hearing is that John is consistently doing X, and this is the impact that it's having on you to do your job. So
Right.
that's just a clunky description of it. The other thing, and sometimes this is a bit of surprise when I work with leaders on their coaching, and it can be a little bit more uncomfortable. You're not reflecting back the content of the issue, but you're reflecting back to them the emotion and the feeling. So I might say, as I'm listening to you describe your relationship with your coworker, I'm just getting this sense of distrust in the relationship. Is that true for you? And John, what you're doing here, and this is, I mentioned before, don't put pressure on yourself to get it perfect. So I may say, it sounds like there's this level of distrust in the relationship with your colleague right now. Is that true for you? Now, one response could be, yeah, distrust is, yeah, that's exactly it. Or what can happen sometimes, they may say, no, it's not distrust necessarily, but and then they'll describe something else. Well, don't beat yourself up going, oh, dang it. It wasn't distrust. I got it wrong. What people appreciate is the fact that you toss something out there trying to name it, but it causes them to think, no, it's not distrust. It's It's more of a lack of confidence in their ability to do so. Well, notice the nuance of that. If we're trying to solve a distrust issue when it's really an issue of, I don't think my colleague is competent at being able to do this, that's an entirely different perspective and way to approach it. So the reflecting back, the mirroring process can be not only the specifics of the issue, what the problem is, but also the emotion and the feeling that the person is having about. When people know that they've been seen and heard emotionally, that's huge in trust building and their ability to open up to you as their leader even more to talk about what's going on for them.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And, a big piece of this, I'll take it a step further when it comes to finding out their emotion and how they feel in relation to their issue. Oftentimes, what I find is what's the emotion behind the emotion? So let's
Mm.
say someone's knocked on your door, they come in, it's maybe a brand new member of your team. And what they begin to describe to you is what their first week has looked like. And as they're describing how terrible their onboarding has been and what a week it's been, they start to describe how confusing it is to not know where the answers are, what resources to look at, who to go talk to. But as you hear them describe it, what you notice is maybe something they haven't said. They said the word confused, but sometimes what you want to find out, how does it feel to be that confused? The emotion behind the emotion. And so you may pick up on, what I'm really noticing here right now, it must be frustrating to be that confused, that much in the dark. And to your point, Doug, they may go, yeah, that's it. Or, no, I don't know. Okay, if it's not frustration, then what is it? And what you have to appreciate, as you said, let go of the need to get it right, have the next, magical guess as to how they're feeling about their situation. Appreciate the fact that it's very likely at this point in the conversation, they are likely articulating things they've never said out loud. And so the processing that's happening for them in the moment is such a key source of clarity for them in terms of how they're thinking about their situation, how they're examining their role as it relates to their issue. And this look in the mirror that you mentioned, so important, because if you can imagine, as I said earlier, this visual, someone knocks on your door, they come in your office, and they are face to face with the problem. It's right up against their nose. Well, not only do we want you to zoom out and circle around this issue and see it from multiple perspectives, an important part of that rounding out is what's the view from the mirror. Such a key part of the perspective. Yeah. So in this current state, what else do we need to take a look at? Because for me, Doug, the empathy piece, the really connecting with this person through listening, through the questions you're asking, through the space you're creating, both verbally, emotionally, physically. Empathy is a key milestone for me under current state, knowing that, okay, not only do we have clarity around what's the problem behind the problem, but how are you really feeling in relation to it? What's your current state as it relates to this issue? To me, I wouldn't call it necessarily a eureka moment, but this is an important turning point where we may actually know exactly what it is that we're needing to spend some time on. But other thoughts in this current state, Doug?
Yeah, I want to pick up on the word empathy that you just used. So not only in the relationship of the leader and the individual being coached and having that empathy and connection, there are times in this part of a coaching conversation where I think it can be effective to challenge the person appropriately. So to not only look at the issue from their perspective, but other people's perspectives as well. So I'll just go back to this hypothetical. This person I'm coaching on my team is having an issue with one of their colleagues. Sometimes what can be perspective shifting for someone is to ask a question like, well, if I'll make up the name here, Bob, this person that you're in struggle with on the team, if Bob were sitting here today, how do you think Bob would describe the current situation? Now, John, it can be very telling. Again, what you're looking for is not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it, what they're expressing. So if someone says, I have no idea how Bob would respond to it, like, well, isn't that interesting? And you might even hold that up to the person, say, isn't that interesting? This is a person you work closely with side by side every day. And what I just heard you say is you have no idea what Bob's perspective is or how it's impacting him. Or, and probably more commonly, the person will hypothesize and say, well, this is probably what Bob would say about it. And in that moment, as you start getting the person that you're coaching thinking about others that are involved and attached to this issue, and sometimes there can be multiple individuals, that can be perspective shifting for them as well. So that person's ability to describe another person's perspective and even express empathy for where that person is coming from is really important to their relationship with the person or this particular issue. So don't feel like you just need to keep it focused on the person you're coaching and their relationship to the issue, but sometimes it can be very helpful to broaden that conversation and have them bring others' perspectives to the table as well.
Yep. Yeah. So a couple of other things that could happen. And, let's say we have set aside 45 minutes or an hour for this conversation. And as we try to discover the problem behind the problem, or to, I used to have a boss that would say, boil the ocean. We've narrowed this thing finally down to something very specific. The what if, and the what if being, what if there are, in fact, 3 or 4 different things that are very worthy of attention in this coaching conversation. This is a part of the conversation where you as the coach can direct them a little bit, but by having them make the choice. And so
Right.
there's an opportunity here, and it's not that we wouldn't get to all 4 maybe of the issues that have been listed as kind of primary core root cause type issues as it relates to the problem that you've brought. But let's maybe have you choose one that you feel will be most helpful to take a look at right now.
Yep.
And there's a few different ways you can do that. One, I think the sizing approach is always interesting, comparing those 4 items against each other. It's like, hey, we have item A, item B, I heard C, and I heard D. Maybe on a scale 1 to 10, size these for me in terms of their importance and impact right now on you. Another way I've sized them before is the ease of getting that off your plate and out of your way. Like, which one would make the most sense for us to maybe tackle first? And so it's kind of a first things first approach. Any other things you would share, Doug, around maybe some potential narrowing that might need to happen, knowing that, at the end of the day, we can't solve everything that you've brought to the table in this one conversation. How do I support you in a way that gets you after something that'd be worthwhile for you?
Well, I wouldn't offer anything new other than just to reinforce what you just described. That my experience has been in coaching conversations that it is very common as you listen to someone describe their situation, um, that there are opportunities for 2, 3, 4 different things that are going on for them, and it is critical, I believe, to narrow that focus and do exactly what you suggested. Because once we get into the other steps of this conversation, ultimately we're going to end at action. And if you're trying to solve for 3 or 4 very distinct issues that are going on at the same time, one, the person is probably going to leave the conversation feeling pretty overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And 2, their their action plan is going to be a mile long because we're dealing with too much. So our goal here, I believe, has to be to narrow their focus. And some of the language that I'll use with folks is, I don't want them to get nervous or feel poorly. Hey, I'm leaving these 2 other things uh, unaddressed. It's like, you'll get to those, but for right now in this moment, just want you to know that we're really going to focus on this one particular issue. So that's My experience has been that's a pretty common outcome to have in this current state part of the conversation. A lot of things going on for people.
Yeah. A few times what I've had happen too. So let's say you're back to this scenario where we got A, B, C, and D as all, maybe worthy options, and you ask them to size it. I don't know if you've had this happen, Doug, but you may ask them, hey, on a scale 1 to 10, what's the impact and importance? And they item A is a 7, item B is a 10. It's like, oh, okay. Item C, that's kind of a 1. And so it's interesting to me that how just hearing them out on a few of these issues, just the act of being able to say those things out loud sometimes is a way to maybe not necessarily solve for it, but set it aside in their minds. So they realize over the course of the conversation in this current state, that's actually not a big deal to me. It's just kind of bothering me today. And there are some
Right.
bigger issues that are worth pursuing, and don't deny the impact of that, of being able to help someone just kind of, stop spending emotion and anxiety potentially on something that at the end of the day, you're actually not that worried about. We hope you enjoyed. That's a wrap for part 1 of our conversation on the coaching framework. Tune in next time for part 2. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care.